Okay, on the next page, your next page should look like this. And again, I'm going to break it down part by part. Okay, read the beginning of Act 1, Scene 2, which introduces the Van Daan family. And I should go ahead and say that this is not the entire play. If we were going to read the entire play, it would take a lot longer. There are lots of links online where you can see other schools, other groups performing this play, which if you want to go look at those, that's totally up to you. That would be great if you are having trouble envisioning this. And also, I may mispronounce some of these names, so you'll have to forgive me if I do. Okay. It is early morning, July 1942. Notice the time difference. We've gone back 3 years. The rooms are bare, as before, but they are now clean and orderly. Mr. Van Daan, a tall, portly man in his late 40s, is in the main room, pacing up and down, nervous. His clothes and overcoat are expensive and well cut. Mrs. Van Daan sits on the couch, clutching her possessions. A hat box, bags, etc. She is a pretty woman in her early 40s. She wears a fur coat over her other clothes. Peter Van Daan is standing at the window of the room on the right, looking down at the street below. He is a shy, awkward boy of 16. At his feet, a black case, a carrier for his cat. The yellow Star of David is conspicuous on all of their clothes. If you do not know what the yellow Star of David is, I encourage you to go look it up. It's something that all Jews had to wear during this time of the Holocaust, and it's what identified them as being Jewish. Okay. Explore how to answer this question. What do these stage directions tell you about the setting and characters in the play? So the stage directions introduce new characters and give information about a change to the setting. So think about what the stage directions tell you about the setting and characters. Study the chart below and fill in the missing information. Okay, so we know that this was in July 1942. I actually called that to your attention so that you would notice we've gone back 3 years. And then it is during World War II. Now, I'm looking back at it, and I don't think there's anywhere that specifically says that, but if you know the time period and you know what the yellow Star of David was for, then you would know that's during World War II. But if you didn't, then you might not understand that. So that's why it's a good thing that we've got Google at our fingertips. The rooms. Okay, what does it say specifically about the rooms? If we're looking back, it says clean and orderly. The rooms are bare as before, but they are now clean and orderly. So go ahead and write clean and orderly right there by the rooms. And then Mr. Van Daan is tall, portly, nervous. Okay, we see that. Mr. Van Daan, a tall, portly man, pacing up and down. He's nervous. He's also well dressed. His clothes and overcoat are expensive and well cut. They don't mention that, but you could put that if you want to. Mrs. Van Daan, she has a lot of possessions with her, a hat box, bags, etc. She's a pretty woman in her early 40s, and she wears a fur coat over her other clothes. And then we have Peter. We're introduced to Peter. Peter is shy, awkward, and 16. He is carrying his cat, and if you know what the yellow Star of David is, then you know that he is Jewish and that his family is Jewish, because it says that it's conspicuous on all of their clothes. All right. Can't really compare your notes and settings and about setting and characters with the partner because you're probably isolated. That's fine. All right, the next page, this is what it should look like. We're on page 155, and again, we're going to break it down. This is continuing Act 1, Scene 2, so we haven't moved on to a different act or scene yet. Mrs. Van Daan, she's rising, she's nervous, she's excited. Something happened to them. I know it. Mr. Frank said they'd be here at 7 o'clock. He said, Mr. Van Daan speaking, they have 2 miles to walk. You can't expect. Mrs. Van Daan speaking, they've been picked up. That's what happened. They've been taken. Mr. Van Daan indicates he hears someone coming. Mr. Van Dam, you see? Okay, so this is a little confusing to read because you have to read the person's name before what they say to know who's saying what. But their name is not part of the dialogue, okay? It's set before the dialogue. And if you're reading really fast, it gets kind of tricky sometimes. So slow down and read that carefully. Okay, the close reading, it wants us to underline details in the dialogue and stage directions on this page to tell you what is happening at this point in the play. So how does the scene create a feeling of tension? Oops, I accidentally skipped him. Okay, something's happened to them. All right, so Miss Van Dam thinks something has happened to them. We don't know who them is, but she thinks something's happened. She's also nervous and excited. Okay, this probably does not mean excited, happy, just excited, more like expecting something to happen. So underline nervous and excited, something's happened to them, I know it. And then we could underline you can't expect, they have 2 miles to walk, that Mr. Van Dam said. And Mrs. Van Dam mentions that they could have been taken. And then our stage directions, Mr. Van Dam indicates that he hears someone coming. So maybe he's put his hand cupped around his ear to help him hear. Maybe he's put his finger to his lip to try to tell everyone to be quiet. Maybe he just stops suddenly. So whatever it is, he hears someone coming. So underline those things that I mentioned. All right, on the bottom half of the page, it says circle the correct answer. We've done these 1,000 times, y'all. We know how to do it. Which statement best describes this plot event based on the dialogue and stage direction in this scene? So what we just read right here, it wants us to note the character's words and actions. What tells you that this is not an everyday situation? Okay, so an everyday situation. We know that this is not an everyday situation, but there are some things in here that show us that. So let's go through these one by one. A, people the Van Dams know may be in danger. All right, what shows us that they could be in danger? If you want to pause and go back and look, you can. Something's happened to them, they've been picked up, they've been taken. All of those things show that something could have happened to them. The next one says Mrs. Van Dam is a nervous and excitable person. Is that what's happening in this part of the play, or does that just show Mrs. Van Dam's personality? If you answer correctly, you said the second one. It just shows her personality. The Van Dams are waiting to have dinner with friends. They've been taken. Also, if you go back, when we're introduced to Mrs. Van Dam, if you go way back, she's got her possessions, a hat box, bags, etc. Peter Van Dam is carrying his cat in a carrier. This does not sound like people meeting each other for dinner, okay? Mr. Frank called to say he would be running late. Did Mr. Frank call? Mr. Frank said they'd be here at 7 o'clock. And it seems like he's running late, but it does not show anywhere that he called them, okay? So the correct answer would be A, people the Van Dams know may be in danger, all right? So let's do the show your thinking. Look back at the answers you did not choose, which would be B, C, and D. Which one does not fit the details in the scene? And then it says, which one tells about a character instead of a plot event? Okay, so you could say B, Mrs. Van Dam is nervous and an excitable person, tells about a character instead of a plot event. It tells about a character, not what's happening. The Van Dams are waiting to have dinner with friends. This does not fit the detail in the scene because they have bags with them. Why would you take suitcases and your cat to dinner? That would be weird. And then Mr. Frank called to say he would be running late. Nothing in the scene supports that Mr. Frank called to say he would be running late. So if you need to pause this, rewind what I just said, and then figure out how to write that down, that's fine. If you do not have this on a paper copy, then take notes on a piece of paper. That's totally fine with me. Or pull up your notes on your computer and write this down, or do it in a Word document, okay? I am just going to request for now that you try your best, and I would like you to turn in the independent practice to me, but for this, we're just practicing like we usually do in class.